잘 들어오고 계신가요?
네.
들어오신 분들이 계시나요?
Oh, hello. Hi, Wille.
Hello.
Okay, so I spent 10 minutes to understand how to do this. Fortunately, had the time.
Okay. Yeah, but we are here.
And I still could not share. Maybe because host need to, or somebody need to stop sharing or what?
Yeah, there is okay. Let's have a look. But yes.
Okay, I'm trying to share, for example, share. Why not? It's okay. So I'm sharing.
Yeah.
Yes, it's like preview, but
You are sharing.
I'm sharing. Yes,
Yeah.
but do you see my screen or not?
I see. Practically, I see myself because you're sharing the video.
But I don't see myself. I don't see my screen, but
yeah. If you change to the slides, if you take the PowerPoint or something else, then you can share your slides.
Yes, this is what I don't like to do, but anyway.
Now I see your slides. You can now put these slides.
So
yeah,
if you
put now slides, yeah, and now you go to presentation mode, and then everything is okay.
No, actually I don't want presentation mode because I want jump between slides, but it's still acceptable.
Oh, of course, but yeah.
But I don't see what I'm sharing. Let me see. Maybe I will find out. Yeah, all this derivative from Zoom have something unusual. Not standard situation. What I. Okay, yeah. I'm back on this. Okay, this actually gives me opportunity to. Now it's sharing stopped. Yes. No sharing. Okay, I will see. Maybe you will command something if needed. But at least. Okay, and we have sufficient number of already people. No, Margaret was all time.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Just double checking.
All right.
Should I try to share my slides?
Okay, yeah.
That looks good.
You see the yeah, I see what is my screen sharing. Okay, this goes that way. Okay. 4 minutes.
Hi, Willie. What are you drinking now? Coffee or tea?
Coffee. It's
Oh, yes.
early morning
It's a-
here in.
This is what I was told that people compete with Dutch to be the biggest coffee drinkers in the world.
Yeah, that's rumor that Dutch are biggest coffee drinkers in the world
Yes.
because Finns, statistically, it's a Finns. Yeah,
Very,
we
very
drink
polite.
totally too much.
Yes, very polite from your side.
Yeah, well, in Finland we drink too much coffee, I think so. I do it also. So.
주인분을 선택해 주세요. 똑같은 것이 정했어요. 잠깐 나왔습니다.
Okay. Andrew is not here yet. Someone is running here.
The last person who could be at the meeting. It's around this acceleration.
Yeah. Okay. Let's start very soon.
Excuse me, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, unfortunately, we have a small problem now, technical issue. So could you please wait for us
Okay.
3 minutes? Is it okay?
Okay. Yeah, that's okay. That's okay. We are waiting for one speaker also, so that's okay.
Hello? Yeah, we are.
Hello?
Yeah, now we can start. The problem has been solved.
Okay. So then we can start. Let's share. I will share my screen here. No, here. I'm sharing, and here's the slideshow. Okay, let's start this session called Data Spaces Taxonomy Birds of Feather session. And welcome everyone. My name is Ville Tenhonen, and I'm working for EGI Foundation as a data solutions architect. And I'm one of the co-hosts of the session, and then we are running this Bird of Feather session, which explore data spaces taxonomy things today. The program of the session is goes that way. We have a number of discussion items, but the agenda is this goes that way. That I have a very short introduction to this data spaces teams. Then we have Yuri Demchenko from the University of Amsterdam, who expressed the data spaces taxonomy. What does it mean? Then there is a comment from Mark Dietrich from EGI Foundation, and comment from Andrew Trelaw from Australia concerning about role of data spaces and so on. Then we have a lot of time for discussions on the taxonomy definitions and all data spaces issues what we have. And then we can use some time for the discussion about possible data spaces interest group or working group statements and so on. So welcome Andrew also. So short introduction. Concept of the data space or data spaces. We have seen in Europe many times data spaces in European Commission papers and the definitions and so on. There is some definition for the concept of the data spaces, and one latest paper from last February says that data spaces should be include data sharing tools and services. There should be cloud capacities and related services. Also include some data governance structures, and it should improve availability, quality, and interoperability of data. This kind of data-related concepts and ideas behind this data spaces terms. Then I check what does it say in Wikipedia, and it says that okay, data spaces are an abstraction in data management, and it's related strongly in data integration systems, and it more or less interoperability things, and a little bit more technical thing and technical definition than we saw in the European Commission papers. Then Gaia X is a one European initiative also, and it brings to the relationship between trusted partners on the table when they are defining data space. And then there is one article from same community which defined data space as a centralized infrastructure for trust for the data sharing and exchange in data ecosystems based on commonly agreed principles. It gives us a little bit more, it gives us infrastructure things and this trustworthy and community aspects to this definition, and data ecosystems ideas. So a couple of questions concerning data spaces. We have we have discussed, for example, here in Research Data Alliance and in some other communities also, a number of different kind of things like a data commons. In RDA, we have a Research Data Commons interest groups also. We have a data fabric, so nowadays it's a fair digital object fabrics, which basic idea is somehow related also interoperability of the research data. Then we have a virtual research environments. This is a little bit different concept. And then we have seen data term, data cyber infrastructure, which means that there is also similar, little bit similar ideas of the infrastructures and data sharing possibilities and so on. So my questions in general are, for example, that what data spaces means in research communities. Are they real one or something? Is there a clear definition for the data spaces? We have seen that, okay, there is a multiple of them. Is there similarities and differences between different kind of data management and sharing concepts? Is there, and one discussion item also might be that, okay, is this data space only European term and other world use, for example, data commons or something like that, and what we should do with this thing. But these are this kind of general questions, and now I would like to hand the floor to the Yuri Demchenko from the University of Amsterdam, and please, Yuri, you can present yourself.
Okay, yes, you stop your sharing, and I will do mine.
Yes. Wait a second. Am I sharing right now?
It doesn't allow me to share, actually. We don't see my screen.
No.
Okay, let me once more.
No.
Okay. Okay.
So that's strange, Yuri, because I can share.
Yeah. No,
you
actually,
share.
you should already see my screen. Yes or not?
Yes. Now I can see your screen.
Yes, perfect.
Okay.
Now I can see your slides.
Okay, so my slides. Okay, Ville, thank you for making this introduction. I would just want to say that just background. We try to work this defining data spaces and data properties already for many years in our research at University of Amsterdam, because Netherlands is running a couple of projects that on data sharing, data exchange, even data markets. So we try to approach this topic from different aspects, defining data property and defining environment, what technology background, infrastructure. But what just want to add what Ville showed on the in his slides is starting from Wikipedia definition. Unfortunately, what that's okay, or maybe our approach, then we look at the existing data spaces definition that came mostly from the database. We did put into account this data space definition because it's really created for the very technical purposes. But due to a move to household data sharing and data economy, European Commission first introduced data spaces concept or term into use in their programs, starting from, say, 2018, and after that, International Data Space Association, after that, Gaia X, and it's created a quite extensive or multiple way how to approach. But none of these approaches note on this initiative used the, say, conceptual approach to defining data spaces. At the Research Data Alliance made a great work on supported data sharing, research data sharing. So what I did, what we did in our, discussed our group at University of Amsterdam in December, January, created some kind of initial approach, but now then preparing to this meeting, I tried to review this. It happens that a variety of definition and different aspects is even became even less clear for me. So what I will present on this slide, I will present like reference information on European Data Space documents initiative that has a number of documents, and another part is a industrial data space activity that led by Industrial Data Space Association, that they defined reference architecture and design principles. And this I will provide this very quickly as a reference information. After that, I stop on the more detailed view and quotation from their documents, how these documents define data spaces. And again, my assumption or my conclusion is still not ready to take one or another side, one or another option of their definition. We need more conceptual approach. So why do we need taxonomy? This is what's the purpose of this BoF, and our activity is first we need to establish at least common language terms and data models for interoperability and for a discussion in professional community. Also, not less important is interoperability between research and industry. Sometimes we see that research going ahead in technology and sometimes industry. So we need to make this mutually beneficial. And also, if we have a good or actionable, workable definition of data spaces, we will help us for the interoperability and sustainable infrastructure services. So if we have a good concept, we can gradually develop services, integrate, and so on. But to make this definition, we need to actually start from defining what can be data space, what we can identify as a data space properties, which should be based on how we see data that we need to, that will become a, say, a center of the data spaces. And standardization, surely. Industry goes for standardization. Research Data Alliance is very active in defining best practices, and this we will have mutual benefits. And I put this small block here that in interoperability, I also looked at the sessions that were been already today at RDA meeting, that people are thinking and talking about interoperability in a form of 4 layers, which is actually defined as a European interoperability framework: technical infrastructure, semantic, metadata, organizational, and legal. I think at least we never look at a organizational and legal, but technical and semantic is something what we need to discuss and what we are most interested. So, European data spaces. European data spaces has 2 components. It's a European documents and so-called European Data Governance Act, a number of other documents. I will not much pay attention to this or spend time. And industrial data space, which is defined by International Data Space Association, IDSA, and currently Gaia-X, which are in conceptual approach, or say technical. For me, I understand as a quite having the common approach, or at least majority of them are the same people. So if you look at the documents that produced by European Commission, including there are 2 documents of this year in February and in May that I haven't reviewed detailed deeply to understand how they understand data, how they understand their data spaces, or how they present. The essential document is a European Data Governance Act that defines data as any mean, any digital presentation of act, facts, and so on. So this also gives us a kind of understanding that if you want to define data spaces, we need to understand what is data, how they related to data spaces, and what we need to do this data as a part, or whatever, as part of the data spaces. So some ideas or some kind of attempts to do this, I put on the last slide of my presentation. And just to share some interesting observation from European documents, that they also defined so-called altruistic data sharing. So data sharing for non-commercial purposes, community benefits, and so on. And these documents, I would say, it contains around 4-5 pages on defining what is altruism in data sharing. Maybe it would be interesting for other people to look at this. And another important or interesting initiative from European community is to define common European data spaces. And they define it 9 of them. And you see this list is health, industry, manufacturing, agriculture, finance, and energy, and skills, including skills. So I've seen development on really data spaces definition in the industry, what is actually maybe it originated, and agriculture. Any other developments, I haven't noticed that they came to some essential development. But industrial data spaces, it's something what is started in some time, I would say from 2018. And the major initiative, a major intention of to define how create data spaces as a sovereign approach to data sharing. So data sharing should be under control of the data owner. And all industrial, say, data flow or data process include from sensors, IoT, data load, transform, process, and operate. And this is intended to be covered by data spaces definition. Again, implying what kind of requirements to the infrastructure. And main work here was done by International Data Spaces Association. This is a very active organization. We will have a BoF, not BoF, session at the IoT week in Dublin, whereas I'm physically present here. It will be on Thursday, and data spaces will be approached from the point of view how to create infrastructure. So International Data Space Association, ITSA, they created a lot of this. So this is overview of background and who are main actors. And I will spend a couple of minutes to quote and to say, comment, analyze. No, analysis is still not sufficiently done, but at least I will quote definition by European documents and what they actually focus, and in definition by organization that do the industrial data space development. So European Commission used data spaces, as I mentioned, starting from 2018, but this is never was defined and meant in sense of creating environment for secure and a effective data exchange to apply to comply with European laws. So this is what the main European definition of data space, applying policy and supporting data sharing, including in different domains. So data spaces defined as a environment where specific domain may establish policies and schedule infrastructure to define data. In the future, what it will be discussed during this meeting, if it's a ecosystem or another type of, say, environment in which data are shared, is still not clear. But what was done by a International Data Space Association in their activity, that to define data space is in a kind of a ecosystem. And this was interesting. We were discussing during preparation of this both and after the first, what was at the RDA 18 to define is data space is a ecosystem or not, and what is ecosystem or another environment. And still, my opinion is still is not clear how we can define data spaces as ecosystem or not. And Mark probably will extend on this. At this time, I just want to say that community of international data spaces is actually using data space definition as federated data ecosystem. And in different meanings, this is a big slide, but I will split it on a two-part. This data space can be defined as a federated data ecosystem within a certain application domain and based on sharing policy and rules. So data space is ecosystem, and we probably will discuss either we agree with this or not, or we need a better definition. But again, the issue that this definition is shared by very big community of professionals or practitioners. And again, this is connected to the multiple actors which agree on common rules and policies and approach. Another aspect of data spaces is decentralized infrastructure for data sharing. Okay. First, I was looking at this definition. For me, it was like closer to infrastructure and ecosystem. But if we look more closely on this definition, so this is in and not only infrastructure and not actually ecosystem. So I would say, just sharing my opinion, if I would say agree that data space may be ecosystem, this kind of inconsistency in definition in very serious documents that's produced by very big community, they still state a question that we need to revisit this and possibly work with this community to define, say, better definition. Very interesting also document produced by Finland Ministry of Transport and Communication. They also revisited data spaces definition, but not entirely using the word or term of ecosystem, like framework. And you, again, do we agree this definition using the medium as a basis for defining data spaces? Again, question. We need to do this. Or start definition of data spaces from more conceptual point of view. And this slide also shows what we may need to, it's my proposal for discussion, include into preparation or analysis, or say analysis of taxonomy on data spaces. First, we need to define what are data properties we want to include into data spaces definition. Definitely everybody is using, but we need to still decide. It's data model, the namespace, language, encoding, and so on. And which operations we can do or want to do on the on the data spaces, or on data in data spaces: create, store, modify, delete. In this way, we very closely link to the definition what was purely technical, that originated from data spaces and so on. Okay, so this is the questions that we may need to discuss. And I will just would leave this slide for 1 minute that people will read, and to keep in mind what we can discuss in our discussion part. Apologies for longer than I expected time, but this maybe will be helpful.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Yeah. What is... Yeah, thank you, Yuri. And do we have any immediate questions or comments to Yuri from the audience? We have a discussion time after presentations, but if there is any immediate comment, please. Okay, if there is not any immediate comment, so then we go forward, proceed to Mark. Emmanuel.
Sorry, sorry, can you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah,
at least I'm here.
Hello, I'm Nathaniel Wilson. I'm a researcher and teacher. So I just have one question for the speaker, Yuri. He focused a lot on the European environment for data. What I'm wondering, are there any other models in America or in Australia or anywhere else in the world that have developed something that Yuri's ideas of data management can sort of follow? Is there anywhere else that models and documents are already in place that they are trying to set up in the EU?
Okay, I can answer that issue that data spaces really was developed and brewed in Europe for last few years, but we discovered that similar concept is data commons, and we will have presentation by Andrew Treloar in just after next presentation, and it was a part of our discussion. So I'm happy, but it was my share to present this kind of European, techno-European approach, vision.
Okay, thank you.
Another part of your question is to use or to apply data management operations principle for data spaces definition. This may be we need to look at a work of the data commons of RDA group, if this approach was taken. Metadata is a common discussion for data spaces or data management, but operation of data on data. First time I've seen this at a Fair Digital Object, a workshop that has been organized in December.
Okay, so I suppose this kind of leads from one question into the next. So I'm quite curious about this. Does this mean that you will only keep a focus on European data management for the foreseeable future. And yeah, so would there be sense in suggesting like an international data management platform that will kind of guide how regional data management is arranged? I don't know if I'm expressing myself in the best
At least I
possible way.
understand you actually, if you are addressing in response to my presentation, so just my opinion. We never go or plan or say intend to be only European. Will be European development, but a group which is created at DA is really involve people to work internationally and actually collect all experience, volunteer and interested people to work on this. And maybe something what we decided at this meeting, but development in say a European context will go without us. We need only to have a good understanding and make them also interested in cooperation on this, and given our contribution to what they will find the value for them. And again, finding more conceptual approach to the data spaces definition to benefit for our purpose, it would be the goal of us, of our activity. And you are welcome to, surely, to contribute.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Nathaniel. Yeah, let's proceed and go to the next presentation by Mark Dietrich from EGI Foundation. So please, Mark.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Let me now perform the most difficult task of my day, which is to share my screen and get the right thing to show up. So you're seeing that?
Yes.
Are we?
Here we are.
Are we cooking with gas? Okay. So.
So Mark, we're seeing all of these thumbnails down the left-hand side. Is that what you intended?
I don't see it myself.
Can you kick that into presentation mode?
Yep.
So this is,
yeah.
I've stopped presenting. Now I think what I need to do is to switch screens.
Switch displays, yeah.
If I can. No, sorry guys. Yeah, I told you this is the most difficult part. Nope. There doesn't seem to be a choice in, oh, here we go. No.
I think that there is this menu called slideshow. If you select there or something, so
I'm not finding that because I don't have my usual second monitor, so everything is confused. So I tell you what, I'm just going to stay in the non-presenter mode. I'll try to minimize this.
Yeah, that's great.
Okay.
All right, so we'll carry on. So I'm going to try to put some of this in perspective. I think Nathaniel's questions were quite apropos, quite relevant. So what makes data spaces special globally? I think one interesting point at the very beginning I'd like to make is that Yuri has described a lot of work by governments in Europe to enable sharing of data, not only amongst the research community, but also amongst industrial players, businesses, public sector organizations. And also there's a hope and an intent to put a common framework together that allows the sharing of health data, so clinical data, with appropriate controls for personally identifiable information. So this is, in a sense, a broader and more ambitious objective than we are seeing in some of the data sharing initiatives in the research community. And we do know that there are data commons, and we do know that there are virtual research environments, working groups within RDA. So how do we bring those pieces together? How do we put them into context? So that's what I'm going to try to address here. What makes data spaces special globally? So we do have lots of terms and technologies. We have lots of people doing things, the data sharing space, data commons, data sharing domain, data lakes, virtual research environments, etc., as well as many of the specific examples that Yuri talked about a bit in his presentation. So historically, when we share data, that we've had two choices. Either we're going to exchange it bilaterally, one-on-one with your organization or institution and another institution, with an exchange agreement, a data transfer agreement. The language may differ, but it's basically a one-to-one type of situation. And then in many cases, the only other choice was to have open data, to essentially publish the data and make it generally available. So what's coming up is some intermediate choices in between these two extremes. And we go from the left, where there's very limited data visibility, to the right, whereas there's quite wide visibility. And I can call out a couple of terms that we've talked about a little bit already in Yuri's presentation, which is the idea of data space, which is generally a public idea. We have a couple of flavors of data ecosystem, which appear to be a somewhat more limited amount of data visibility. And you have a data ecosystem off in the sort of middle left, an ability for two data ecosystems to potentially transfer data between them and share data between them. And then the idea of a federated data ecosystem, a community of data ecosystems that are working together to provide federated data. I also want to call out something that personally I've only encountered quite recently, which is in the health data research environment, called safe projects. In the UK, there's a fairly big body of work around trusted research environments, and that's built around the idea of a safe project, which has 5 components: the safe project itself, safe people, safe data, safe settings. So it's the idea that you're going to have a very limited exposure of data to a well-defined set of people. So we move again from the far left, where we're just doing a one-on-one exchange of data, all the way to the far right, where we have completely open data. So there are examples within these, and I've placed a couple of the icons that people in Europe will recognize. You see the European Commission's own logo over under public data space. They're kind of planting their flag at that spot. I think it's a fair statement that the European Open Science Cloud, that many of you may know, probably sits at the federated data ecosystem place in the spectrum. And of course, there's also open data, where public sector data is being made available in a consistent way. Now, the question that is being asked here, quite directly, is how do we map some of the other terms that are being used? So where does the data commons sit? Where do virtual research environments sit? Where do data lakes sit? And there may even be several other flavors. And I'm not attempting to answer that question. And in fact, their location of these terms on this spectrum is just to say that we don't know. It's not just to make any judgments about what the right placement is. It's also important to think about what's going on in the research arena. So in the context of one of the projects that EGI has been conducting, we looked in detail at 3 communities. 2 of them are international. One of them is I guess mostly European, but it's more than just Europe. So the IS, ANUS, and Earth System Grid Foundation, is one of them. This is basically the community of researchers around the world that does the climate change modeling. And they have a pretty extensive, you could call it a data space, you could call it a data common, but they're working with and sharing and processing large amounts of data in a public environment, in an open environment, in a completely accessible environment. And when we analyze that relative to the definitions that the Commission has put together for, the European Commission has put together for a data space, everything that they do in this international community basically qualifies as a public data space. The same could be said about the global biodiversity community in GBIF. And again, an entirely different community, an entirely different domain of research. And yet the parameters of the way they operate with data, they operate with the sharing of data, the exposure of data to others and so on, completely consistent with the definition of a public data space as defined by the European Commission. So I'm not saying that the European Commission is the right definition, but in this particular case, there's a very direct mapping. And so it's worth thinking about this as we move forward. And lastly, we have Datanet, which is marine and coastal data around continental Europe and related land masses, looking at North Atlantic currents, etc. Huge data resource, significant not only amounts of not only data, but also analytical tools, the infrastructure necessary to process this kind of data, its own very specific data models and so forth. Again, a public data space if you look at the way they operate themselves. So this just highlights the fact that these international research communities are already, without really knowing it, they are already providing a public research data space. So what this is telling us is that we have two important dimensions. We've talked about increasing data visibility from very tight control to fully open, but then we have different semantic or research domains. So you might imagine a two-dimensional space where we map these things. And Yuri made reference to some work done by a ministry in Finland, the State of Data Spaces. This particular picture comes from that document. It's flipped 90 degrees from this prior chart, but we see the range from specific to generic left to right, and we see the range from commons, which is quite open, to ecosystems at the top, going from open to more narrow applications. So we might need to flip the chart a couple of times to make it match the picture I just showed you. But the point is there are lots of different things going on, and they occupy different places in this two-dimensional space. One last thing I want to mention is that all of these options, and essentially every one of these little blobs, represents a set of decisions that some group of people have made about how they'd like to share data. And we can map those decisions into a couple of dimensions. If you see in the middle there, findability, accessibility, interoperability, reusability, those are the FAIR principles that we all know and love. And we can see how in each of these areas, there are some specific decisions that need to be made about aspects of findability, aspects of accessibility, interoperability, and reusability. So for example, under business policy and reusability, if you're from the health community, you'll recognize the data use ontology from the Global Alliance for Genomes and Health as essentially a set of predefined usage conditions, acceptable use conditions for data. And those are business policy rules. If you go a little bit to the left there and look at, for example, the International Data Spaces Association, which Yuri was describing, they use a technical specification called the Open Digital Rights Language to specify, to describe what is allowed to be done with any given piece of data. In a legal environment, you might see licensing in this area, and probably I should add that to the box. But when you look at technical and business policy, there are other mechanisms to manage and mediate this question of reusability. So we've got the FAIR principles. We also have quality, which is not part of FAIR, but probably should be, and it certainly is an attribute that the European Commission has defined as being important. And if you talk to anybody in the artificial intelligence world, they'll tell you that, gee, we would like to have some quality data. So how do we make sure we get that? And then lastly, at the very top, we should give some thought to the business model or the trust model that is going to manage the access to these spaces. I do think that some of these questions on this slide need to be considered when we think about virtual research environments, when we think about data commons, when we think about data lakes. There needs to be some clarity about the answers to each of these questions and who is making these decisions and quite frankly, who's responsible for the governance of this particular data sharing initiative. So I throw these ideas out with the intention of positioning the discussion that we've been hearing in Europe against the discussion that's going on globally, and to try to provisionally answer what makes data spaces important globally. So that's all from me, and I'm happy to take questions.
Yes, thank you, Mark. Any immediate questions or comment to Mark? We can come back those questions after the next presentation also. Next presentation comes from a little bit different approach, and it comes from Australia, from Andrew. So please, Andrew, go ahead.
Thank you, Ville, and thank you for the opportunity to talk about what we are doing. You can see my slides, okay?
Yes, thanks.
Yes.
Okay, so I just want to very quickly give you an overview of some of the work that's already underway in the Global Open Research Commons interest group and working group. I work for the Australian Research Data Commons, so a long way away from where Ville is sitting, although I was there recently, but only for one day, unfortunately. So, Global Open Research Commons interest groups. This is a Research Data Alliance interest group. It began in a BoF, a little bit like the one we're in now, in 2018, and was approved as an interest group in 2021. What we're trying to do is we're trying to, I guess, take a subset of that vast puzzle that Mark showed for us. And we're trying to say, let's just focus on the commons. What do we mean when we talk about an open research commons? And we had a lot of debate about, in fact, all three of those words. Was it going to be open? Was it going to be research? Was it going to be commons? Was it going to be something else? We've landed on open research commons. It's an interest group. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to look outside the RDA community to collect with some of this huge amount of activity that we've heard from Yuri and Mark that's underway. And what we're trying to do is, I guess, try and coordinate the delivery of a global open research commons. If any of you are in the session that Simon Hodson led before this one, you will have heard that there are a number of these open research commons or open science commons around the world. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to coordinate activity across those, lead to some convergence, as well as monitoring activities that are going on within RDA working groups and other initiatives. And I'm very grateful to this BoF for allowing me to take a little bit of your time to share what we're doing. I should note, by the way, that if this BoF decides it wants to take things further and set up a working group, we'd be very happy to offer the services of our interest group as a place to coordinate that discussion. We have a definition. So we're calling the research commons a global trusted ecosystem that provides seamless access to interoperable research outputs and services. Now, notice that we've constrained ourselves down to research. So we're not talking about the business domain that you've already heard about for some of the other activities, or the government domain. We're focused quite squarely on research. But I would note that some of the data for research might come from industry or from government. So you can distinguish between data from research and data for research. And I think you could argue that some of the data coming out of the government sector is used by researchers and therefore might be in scope for us. And the bumper sticker, if we had a bumper sticker, would be digital research resources for the common good. As you can see on the right, we've been informed by a number of activities, some of which you've heard about already. My organisation, EOSC, which you can't really avoid, the National Data Services Framework in Canada, now being taken forward by the Digital Research Alliance of Canada, the World Data System and others. We've spent quite a lot of our first year, I guess, trying to work out what is it that you would need to build a commons. We call this our typology of elements. We had a lot of discussion about what the elements are, and we basically believe that you need all of these. So at the bottom, those kind of blue things at the bottom are the core infrastructure elements. The white elements at the top are, if you like, the more social elements. Human capacity, rules of participation, we stole that term from EOSC. Governance, how you engage with your users, how you set up a sustainability framework. And the core is the role of interoperability and standards. So we spent a year or a year and a half agreeing on this set of elements. And then when we thought we could sit back and relax and say, job done, someone said, well, yes, but what do you mean when you say engagement? And so the next step is trying to define all of those terms. And so at the moment, we're going through a process of coming up with agreed definitions. The current document is available at the link there. I'll put the link in chat when I finish. And we're trying to converge on an agreed set of definitions over the next 2 to 3 months. So that's the work of the interest group. However, the interest group has spawned a working group, which got spun off last year. And this is saying, okay, if this is the high level definition, how does that map onto particular activities? And so what we're trying to do there is define a set of international models where we're looking at both internal elements to measure KPIs and external elements, which are the types of services and structures. And what we're essentially doing is going through a series of case studies where each month a different organization will come and talk us through their answers to a questionnaire that we've developed to try and capture these differences. And what we'll do at the end of that process is boil all of that down into if you like, a generic model of how you would build an open research commons along the lines of the diagram that I showed you earlier. And I think that's my last slide. It does, in fact, appear to be my last slide. So if any of you are interested in joining the interest group or the working group, they're both available on the RDA website. And I thank you for your time.
Okay, and thank you, Andrew. Any immediate question to Andrew from the audience concerning about?
Okay, I want to. It's not a question, but just comment. What I've seen on Andrew's mosaic about what they defined as is a really big job, and okay, possibly we need to learn how we can reuse this experience approach mostly, because for my understanding, for my experience, we still don't have the dimensions or features on which we can classify what Mark shown in his presentation, what all the spectrum of all definition.
So you
So we
mean
need
this
to-
diagram, Yuri?
Yeah. This is, I see this is very good, and I remember from our discussion, but I will pay much more attention, time to understand how you create it and how we can reuse, because indeed the say parameters or features on which we can classify or systemize everything.
Yeah, the short answer to your question of how we came up with it is we looked at lots of existing models and tried to analyze what was the common core for each of them.
I fully understand this, what you say. So it's indeed a big block.
Yeah, it was.
Okay. So now we have time to discuss about these data spaces features and research data commons features and this taxonomy need of the taxonomy. And well, one of my question is actually that are these data commons by the definition or in practice and data spaces, are they really different, or are they actually the same idea with different how can I say, a little bit different vocabulary or different kind of terminology, or is there some serious differences, which means that they are different, how can I say, phenomenons or objects, or what they are actually? What do you think?
So maybe if I could start, Ville. So I understand the question. Thank you. I guess the question for me, this is not going to be a very well thought through answer, so I apologize in advance. The question for me is around whether you are just providing access to data or whether you're providing access to services around the data. And maybe it's my fault, but when I hear people talk about data spaces, seems to me to be more focused on access to the data. And yet, increasingly, I feel like unless you have access to services that let you do something with the data is almost useless. So that would be my starting point.
Okay, thank you. Mark, you have raised the hand, please.
So just a quick point of clarification in response to Andrew's thought, and then a different question of my own or a different thought. I think it's a fair concern, Andrew, that the discussion around data spaces often minimizes the role of the infrastructure, the role of the services that are necessary to act on the data. But I think when you work in the area, with the people who are trying to make this stuff happen, they are all very concerned about making sure that the right infrastructure is available, the right services are available to process the data. So the language from some of our bureaucrats might be a little bit more data centric, but in fact, the language from the people who are trying to work on it recognize that there need to have both pieces together. So I don't think that's a distinction. One thing that I do wonder about, which is something that you had said at the very outset, Andrew, which I actually had forgotten about, which is that the GORC definition, the Global Open Research Commons definition, is by definition research, and by definition open. And I guess one of the things that I think, practically speaking, and I had the same conversation with somebody else in the context of private health or personalized health data, is that we cannot exclude these kinds of sensitive data that are perhaps not research or that cannot be open. They are definitely interesting types of data, not only from a research standpoint, but also from a general public. And so, to me, I feel that's perhaps an artificial exclusion. So I feel there's a need for something that's a little more seamless and can deal with personal health data, for example, clinical health data, secondary use data. It can also deal with commercially sensitive data, but also doing all of that in a way that's sensitive to the rights and responsibilities about that data per se.
So Villa, I have a response to that, but we should perhaps let other people say something before I jump in again.
Is there any other comments from anyone? Or I think please Andrew, go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Villa. So that's a very insightful comment, Mark. And I think we did it deliberately rather than accidentally, if I can put it like that. And the reason for that is we're very much driven by Elinor Ostrom's work on a variety of different commons from a couple of decades ago now. And we felt that the problem of dealing just with the open research commons was already so huge, as Yuri has pointed out, that was going to keep us busy for a while. And the problem of dealing with, if I can torture the analogy a little bit, fenced off areas within the commons was something we could worry about down the track. Now, I'm not denying the challenges of health data. And in fact, one of the activities of my organization at the moment is we're in the process of building a health and medical research data commons, which will have to deal with sensitive data. My organization is investing into safe project VREs, I guess, in European terms, specifically to deal with that kind of sensitive data. But for this global activity, we thought that scoping it down to data for research and open data was going to be enough of a challenge. We're not saying that we're trying to solve all of the problems of the world, but there are enough problems within that definition for us.
Okay.
I would also comment, if not anybody from audience, I would like also comment.
Yeah, there is Emmanuel.
Well, go ahead, Yuri. I was just giving some general comments. Yuri, if you comment on Andrew directly, that's fine.
Yes, I also not less general. Just if somebody noticed that 2 weeks ago was a European Data Week driven by Big Data Value Alliance or Data Spaces Business Alliance. Something what actually struck me, that one of session clearly told that all ideas and all projects funded by European Commission to create data markets, means focused on data monetization, straightforward, selling data as a goods, were failed. They failed. So experience shows now that direct monetization of data using blockchain, unfungible properties and so on, adding. So they are looking at that making data monetization now is not monetization, simply economical value can be done based on ecosystem. Here I see very much similarity what research community got this already experience in data commons how defined. So this interesting observation, and I still need to think myself about this. How it change the also all context of previous, say, European Commission advice or thinking and so on. That's all.
Okay, thank you, Yuri. Emmanuel, please.
Yes, thank you very much. This is really a tremendously exciting discussion to me. Thank you very much for initiating this. I'm working for the Helmholtz Association in Germany, and we're trying to establish a data space for the Helmholtz Association as a whole, basically as a model to span the 6 different research areas that we have. And I personally use the data space analogy to teach our infrastructures the vision of that which we want to achieve, because that's mostly what we lack. Most of our infrastructures, they don't know what is the ultimate goal that we want to reach when organizing our data. And so the data space model itself allows to give them different altitudes of view or different flight levels, I don't know how you want to call that, of abstraction layers from the data space to the fair digital objects, to the PID and semantics, into the data infrastructures. And I think this is the real value of the discussion that we have here, is that we can bridge between the practitioners in the data infrastructures towards the vision that we want to sell. And one of the problems we have also in RDA, I think, is that we do not have a common vision, and we do not have common boundaries that we act within. You know, there's so many discussions that go anywhere, that I think this the data commons and the data spaces have the potential to narrow down these discussions and give us some restrictions within which we can place our arguments where we want to move. And with that in mind, I think what we I'm also excited by this hexagon model that Andrew presented, because it shows us what are the building blocks of FAIR, I would say, that we would need to put in place in order to reach the data commons or data space. And I think these, to focus on these blocks, I think is very, very important. That would help at least me a lot, and phrasing these blocks with the practitioners in mind, again, I think would help us gain understanding through the data infrastructures, and to get all these kind of abstract concepts into practice. I think that's what we need to achieve. That's what I'm currently struggling with. And that's what this discussion really, I think, could foster and could improve. And the other thing that I wanted to comment on, sorry, that's different, is Mark, that you're talking about the health data. We also have health data. I think it's a big difference whether we talk about open metadata or open data. I think open metadata typically is not a problem, even in the health area. Often, if you know what is there, that's even if it's anonymized or pseudonymized, that usually works. I come from the earth and environment science. That's much less of a problem. But I usually try to think of it in open metadata, and I don't care about whether the data actually is available. That's a secondary problem of the infrastructures.
Vila, if I can jump in.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, please.
So thank you, Emmanuel. That's very good to hear, and you know, if there's an opportunity to have a chat about what you're doing at Helmholtz, that would be wonderful. I think the hexagons. I do a lot of work with the European Open Science Cloud, and I think the hexagons are quite useful, even with an organization like, or well, an undertaking like the European Open Science Cloud. There's certainly an awful lot going on there, so it may be helpful to put some of the things that are going on into those buckets, so that it's a useful framework. I do think the questions that you need to address in each bucket are important. It's kind of like the 5 safes. There are specific questions you need to answer in those different buckets. There are governance questions and technical questions and so on. So it's a worthwhile discussion just to align our buckets, even if we are dealing with different communities or samples of data sharing initiatives. If there is an open research commons over here, then how are they answering all these questions? If there is a more private, potentially industrial data ecosystem over here, how does it answer those same questions? So we could agree on the questions without necessarily agreeing on without necessarily forcing everything into the same model, but the questions help to define the differences. Just a very quick point on Emmanuel's last point about metadata and data openness or not. It's an interesting question. And perhaps Andrew has some insights on this from what they're doing. We've just been involved in a project, and it's ongoing, called Healthy Cloud here in Europe, looking at hopefully defining a framework for creating a health research and innovation cloud for Europe. There's a lot of work in that area and interest in that area. And one of the things that we've identified as a functional requirement in health is a need for what I would call a safe query, a safe question asking function. In other words, metadata won't work. You need to be able to ask some very specific questions of a data set in a secure way and perhaps get yes, no answers. I use the Go Fish analogy. That's a card game that you play with kids. And I don't think it's played like this in Europe, but you say, okay, do you have any 3s? And then the person you're playing with says, no, I don't have any 3s. And you have to take a card from the pile, and that's bad. So you lose out if you don't guess right what they have. It's the same thing goes on with health research. And in fact, the Global Alliance for Genomes and Health has come up with a Beacon API, which defines exactly how to access this data. And it is not metadata based. It is query based, because they couldn't figure out a way to expose the metadata without possibly exposing too much information and exposing personal information. So just a quick feedback to Emmanuel on that point, and I'm sure Andrew, given ARDC's work in this area, might have some insights as well.
Thank you. Nathaniel, you have raised your hand.
Oh, sorry, I'll stop sharing and wait.
Hi.
Okay.
Yeah, so can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Often when you read about how different programs and institutions are accredited for their research output, they often cite the number of postgraduate students as an indicator of how healthy a field is, right? So my question is not directly related to what's going on right now, but more in terms of what's happening over the next 5 or so years. What's the involvement of postgraduate students in having projects that are specifically aimed at helping the cause of this working group and other groups like this in setting down the principles for data management across the world? So how strong is this really in the European Union? And if we would look forward to the next International Data Week 2 years down the line, what could be the immediate goals that we could set to postgrad students like this, that we could report on or define how this discussion is moving along?
So I
Yes,
can respond
thank
to
you.
that if you'd like.
Please.
It's interesting you asked
ahead.
this question because, Nathaniel, there was actually a presentation just yesterday here in Dublin where it's not International Data Week, but it's IoT Week, Internet of Things Week. And there was a presentation by a fellow in Ireland who said, look, 20 years ago, well, more than 20 years ago, we had computers, but 20 years ago, we only just started having computer scientists. And obviously we've had data for a long time, but the idea of data science is a fairly recent invention. It's obviously a very popular invention, and everybody wants to be a data scientist, and you get a huge salary when you do become a data scientist. And the proposition was that IoT, Internet of Things, would also be something that. Good point, Andrew. I'll have to abuse Martin about his presentation, but that was his statement. With regard to the Internet of Things, that's just now starting. As an example, it's not data spaces, but it's something that might potentially be an interesting thing to focus on. I do know that the European Commission is specifically looking at funding skills development in this area. I don't know what they're going to call it, and I don't know whether it's going to have postgraduate studies or formal accredited programs, but certainly it's an extension of this this data science concept.
I don't want to divorce our discussion from, but Nathaniel, I can say that in our group, in our, say, research institute at University of Amsterdam, we are created even the tenure track on data exchange. There is also created a group on data management. And we have on data exchange, data sharing, data market, around 5 PhD students working in our group. So this is moving. If you are interested, we can discuss specifically in academic sense.
Thank you. I don't think we would have time for that discussion now. So can we extend the discussion of this call, or would we have time to briefly talk about that now?
Our conference system allows mutual connection and discussion. As I mentioned, we can meet with you, Nathaniel.
Okay, thank you, Yuri. I'd like that.
Yes, thank you. Andrew, did you have some point earlier?
Yeah, thanks, Vila. I really just wanted to say in response to Mark's comment that the Research Data Commons dealing with health and medical data, we've identified 4 specific challenges. I won't bother putting the slide up, but the 4 challenges we've identified were federated data discovery and request. How do you find things? Federated data sharing and analysis. So how do you share data across different collaboration platforms? Some of that might be the secure search that Mark talked about. Federated data linkage to enable you to link data from different stores, particularly at the individual person level. And the really tricky one, federated analytics, to let you apply analytical techniques to distributed data collections in a way that is privacy preserving. And so we are in the process of starting activities or building on existing activities in Australia across all of those 4 dimensions. And we've been validating those challenges with our researcher and clinical practitioner communities, all of whom have said, yes, those are the right challenges, which is great. And that's a 10-year agenda, which is a little bit more scary. So check back in 10 years.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, this health, if I can say some words about this health sector things. I have worked with a couple of projects with the personal data. One from the health sector, a project called GLITI. It's creating this kind of platform for the artificial intelligence applications to prevent this kind of memory illnesses and these kind of things. And I have seen that, okay, one main problem within this project is that, okay, there all those rules, agreements, governance models, practices concerning about personal data and legislation regulations have to build from the scratch, which means that it's a work of months to negotiate between different legal offices and different countries. There is a cultural differences even if Europe have a common legislation for the privacy issues and so on. If there is this kind of trusted space where all these kind of things has agreed and there is a common rules and so on, the number of practical development activities are very much faster, I believe. Another project is a global one, and it's not the European one. It's called APIX. It's about academic professions in the information society, and there is the sharing the data is a little bit problematic because there wasn't those common rules and common understanding or this kind of trusted space at the first place. But again, started to combine different kind of point of views of the researchers from United States, Japan, European one, German, and so on. And well, it's a very fruitful discussions, but there is a different kind of, it's avoiding to be fair and apply fair principles in practice, because there is everything have to be started from the scratch and so on. But I see that if there is this kind of space or commons or whatever we call it, but this kind of somehow strong basis for the governance and basis for those rules and trust and some kind of things like that, then it's easier to achieve these fair principle practices and these kind of things, and open the data and know what have to do to open things. Now all this project have to make their work from the scratch, and everyone use a lot of time to create all these things. Okay, we have approximately 7 minutes to go. Any comments or point of views concerning about data spaces, data commons, or their use cases?
I don't have any of those questions, Villa. I was wondering what the next steps were, though.
Yeah, that's the next issue actually. That
okay, sorry.
My question is that no, because it's okay, because it's that's the way it goes. Yeah. Yeah. Next question is that, okay, what we should do next? I see few options, and I'm in this discussion about data spaces, taxonomy, interest group, or working group, or similar. I see that there is a couple of options. One option is that, okay, we try to continue, and we continue these discussions about data spaces and try to enlarge them into the global audience. And then we are, how can I say, a little bit separate from the other discussions. And then another option is to discuss with the research open data commons and these groups which Andrew has mentioned already, and try to discuss that. Okay, if there is a need and if this data spaces taxonomy work fits to this how can I say, common umbrella, and we can, you know, develop as a global common or data space or these kind of communities and these kind of concepts actually, and go that way. And well, and the third, of course, because this is a birds of feather session, the third option is always that, okay, we can't see any kind of paths for the future or so, and understand that, okay, this is the not so RDA issue or something. So these three options in my mind, and Andrew, perhaps you have some other options.
Yeah, I don't want to make your life
Please.
more complicated, Ville, but there is another group which is presenting tomorrow called Data Commons Principles and Practices. It's another BoF. It's tomorrow morning my time, which is, I think it's the first session in Seoul, which I'm also attending to see what they're doing and how it might be aligned. So this is quite a crowded space. Sorry to complicate.
Yes. Yes, this is something what we have also. But please.
Yes, I would say that even that indeed, okay, so for RDA communities, really more natural to speak about data commons, and this, I will definitely try to attend the next session, what Andrew mentioned. But this exactly makes motivation from my point of view that we need to work on this, say, documents on taxonomy. Otherwise, if there is big group of working on data commons, hardly we will clarify the issue of data spaces, or they clarify. We can surely involve our efforts in their group, but having working group to produce taxonomy in a condition that we already have a lot of work done, collected information, and in particular revising, looking if we can reuse already methodology produced by Data Commons Group. It would be quite, from my point of view, specific and focused work. Means creating a working group, produce taxonomy in surely we could be optimistic 1.5 years, but it will take maybe slightly longer, or we can get commitment strong and produce documents in quite visible time.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. Is there anything urgent, or can I shortly wrap up our discussion? Because time has come. Yeah, if I can shortly wrap up this meeting. Yes, thank you for everyone, and thank you for especially for Yuri and Mark and Andrew, our speakers today. This has been again very fruitful and interesting discussion, and general conclusion is that, okay, we have to continue, and I agree with Yuri that, okay, we need some kind of taxonomy for interoperability of data spaces and so on. So we have to continue one way or another, and one way is to participate to this this data commons principles and practices session in this RDA plenary, and continue these global discussions and so on. But okay, I would like to thank you, all the participants and everyone, and therefore, because next sessions are starting very soon, so I will close this meeting right now. Thank you, everyone. See you next time.
Thank you.
Kiitos,
Yeah,
Emi.
see you.
Thank you very much. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.